Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. At this time we have our presentation on canola storage, grain bin storage, and bag storage. I think we'll have some really good stuff with us to share their thoughts. Are Brendan Sherry, farmer from Walla Walla, Washington, Dale Flickema, farmer from Bozeman, Montana, and Stacy Lawrence with Columbia Grain in Craigmont, Idaho. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Brendan and we'll get started.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Brendan Sherry. We farm in Walla Walla County. We go from the west end, where it's about 9 inches of rainfall, to the center part of the county. It's closer to 18 or 20 inches. We typically go wheat, fallow, canola rotation. Sometimes we'll go wheat, winter wheat, spring canola, and occasionally we'll mix in some garbs. We started growing canola, just trying to find a good way to control annual grasses. We were having some issues trying to control cheatgrass and rye, and canola's been a good option for getting rid of that stuff. Got a picture of the combine here. Before you get to this point, I recommend inspecting your bins and giving them a good cleaning. We typically take some sticks and go around the outside and bang all the edges and try to get all the stuff built up on the inside to fall down. And then we go in and scrub all the seams with a stiff broom and sweep it all up. Take the air compressor in there, blow out all the leftover crop from last year. And then a very important thing that we learned is you want to inspect your aeration screens at this time, because some of the aeration screens have a hole that's bigger than the canola. And depending on how your fans work, that can drop down in there and plug it up. And we've went and got some fine screen from the hardware store. I've heard some guys talk about using landscaping screen, and we laid that over the top of our aeration screens, and we haven't had any issues with that yet. When it comes to filling, we just dump directly into our pit with the auger, and we have to use our small trucks. Originally, we dumped into our grain deck with our semis, and that canola would get down between the rollers and the belt, and it would crush, and the oil in the canola would just make that belt spin no matter how tight we got it. And so that's something that we've encountered, and just by dumping straight into the pit and not using our conveyor belt, we've been able to avoid any problems that way. We don't have any issues. Most of the time, all of our seeds pretty ripe. We don't have too many issues with green seeds or anything like that, but when you're filling, having a good evenly ripened seeds definitely helps. Let's see here, and then storing, we've had some issues with heat damage in the past, and this last year, or last 2 years, I guess, we started turning on our aeration fans at night during harvest as we're filling the bin, and we haven't had any issues with heat damage since we started doing that. And then once it gets cold, we'll start running it more regularly, week on, week off, something like that. And we haven't had any heat damage issues since then. Got a couple pictures here inside the bin of us sweeping it out. You can see the aeration screens there. And we have that black vinyl screen door screen that's a little finer than our the vents that were on there. Just another picture of the sweep picking up the canola. And then here it is filling up and heading out. Pretty straightforward there. We just have a sweep auger goes in there just like we do with our wheat. And fill it up and take it up to Warden. So I don't have too much else to say. It's a pretty simple operation, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
Brendan, do you guys ever have issues with your center sump plugging up with chaff when you're loading out?
We haven't. We've had issues with the wheat. There's a side sump, and we had moisture get in there one time, but as long as you keep your bin sealed up, we haven't had any issues with the chaff settling out that way.
What seems to me in our experience, the biggest key for us has been just making sure we're not putting anything over 8% moisture canola in the bin. And we've gone, we've put canola in bins that don't even have aeration for several months. If it's in that, I don't even like it to be that close to 8. I'd rather it be 5 to 6 if we're doing something like that. But what is your guys' moisture typically when you're putting it in a bin, and then how long are you aerating it?
We're pretty dry. I'd have to check, but it's probably 4 to 5%. I'm guessing by the time we're putting it in there. And then I don't know. There was a lot of years where we didn't even use the aeration, but as soon as we had a little bit of heat damage that one time, and the fans are there, and we just started pumping the cold air in there as soon as we can.
Yeah.
And I imagine if you're, depending on your climate, you're either trying to pump in hot air, pump out, or pump in cold air. But for that heat damage, we tried to pump in the cold air.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, you guys? No. If not, Dale, do you have?
If you don't mind, I might just kind of answer some of that questions too. Not only do we have bagging systems, but we also have grain bins. And with our airflow bins, let me back up a little bit, but I'm a farm and ranch in Bozeman, Montana, and we have several different crops, whether it's wheat, barley, corn, canola, and some pulse crops. But lots of times when we're putting our grain or our canola in our grain bins, we'll be pushing that 8 to 10% moisture all the time. Some of that is because of our weather. We don't get it dry enough, or our windows of opportunity are just really small. And so we'll get those bins in there, and we'll get those fans running almost immediately, and we'll let them run for 2 to 3 weeks to push that out of there. And our main goal there is to just keep the canola cool. We may end up drying it down 1%, maybe 2% at best, but there again, we're kind of watching those bins very, very closely for heat. We've actually put it in there one time at 12, and we let the fans run for 2 weeks, and then we pulled out close to 10,000 bushels out of the bin and put it back in to just kind of monitor what we were doing. A lot of that was just based on the fact that we had to put it in the bin at that kind of moisture to get what we were doing done. So, okay, if you don't mind, I'll kind of get started on my bagging thing here.
Yep.
I have,
Good.
I have requested for the control. Let me try one more time as we get into my slides. So as we get going here, one of the reasons why I wanted to start with the bags is I'm mostly on rented ground. And so for me to build a bin or to put something on somebody else's property, that's just doesn't seem to be a very smart idea. And so we kind of started looking at the grain bagging option. Wish I could get my screen up here. So when we started looking at that somewhat, the cost of the bagging equipment was roughly about $35,000 for the bag loader. So that's would be the machine that puts the canola into the bag. And I don't know why I'm not getting the control of.
Dale, I'll go and give it a try, and I can move through the slides for you.
Okay, can you get me to my first slide, please?
Yeah.
A couple of things there too. What we were kind of thinking. Yeah, here's the picture of the tractor and the bagger. Lost my train of thought here, but the machine itself here that actually puts the crop into the bag is roughly about $35,000, and that's a 10-foot bag bagging machine. I think they do make a 12, which is a little more expensive, but get way more product in there. I guess a couple of things here that we need to kind of point out is a little bit as we're looking at placing the bag. I like to put my bags in the field with me. It does a couple of things for me. It definitely reduces the amount of labor that is at harvest. This particular machine here probably could keep up with 3 combines and maybe even 2 grain carts, as it'll put the grain away at harvest. So I don't have trucks that's got to haul it to a bin, or I don't have to sit and wait at an elevator to unload. The cost here of this plastic is roughly about, I'm saying I pay about $950 for a 10 by 300 foot bag. So I roughly get in that, say, 12,000 bushel number. I always kind of figure my cost of storage in that bag is somewhere just a little bit shy of 10 cents. The other thing that kind of got to think a little bit about as we're placing this bag is we want to be fairly level. We could be bagging a little bit downhill, but we do not want to be bagging uphill. The reason for not bagging uphill is then the hill becomes our break. And if we got too much of an uphill slope, what happens is that we can actually pack the bag too full of grain. And so we could actually split the bag right down the center, and then you have a tremendous mess. So we like to go downhill. These little tires right here, they're setting on brakes, and we actually can set a brake pressure as how, and if you want to call it how packed we can get our bags. We really normally don't try to pack them very tight. In fact, we're normally getting in about that 12,000 bushels a bag. I think manufacturer says we can get about 14,000. On the other side of the bag here, it's not on this picture, but there's a little a stretch mark that you can actually kind of keep measuring to make sure that you're not stretching too tight. It doesn't take much of a tractor. In fact, this is a little John Deere 4020. We just leave it in neutral. Kind of want to help guide it going down there, but normally we don't have a man sitting on the tractors we're filling, and it's just a 540 PTO. I think here right now too, when we really get busy, the tractor just stays running at about 1200 RPM and just kind of idles along. Okay, as we just keep stretching that bag out. Okay,
Dale?
Yes.
Do you have to worry about the tractor moving if you're not dumping grain into it?
Well, that's kind of why these brakes here set on the grain cart or on the grain bagger. And so we probably get, I'm just going to say roughly 400 pounds of brake pressure on those drums. That's kind of how we measure that. So as long as it's you're not downhill tremendously, you should never have a problem with that.
So you can just leave the tractor and PTO running, and it'll sit until you start dumping into the bag, and then it automatically starts creeping forward as needed.
Yes, as you're packing the grain into the bag, it actually then pushes the tractor forward. That's how that kind of works.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess here's a picture of us kind of unloading the bag. Let's maybe try a different little one here first. Can we try a different slide? Okay, so we're also unloading the bags. So it actually right in here, this is a pretty big roller that picks up the bag and it rolls the bag onto that roller as we're unloading. So there's kind of a cross auger about this height on the bag, and then to the center auger and out. And you can load trucks, or here we're loading our grain carts because we're taking our grain to market, which we got to get over the state scale. So we have to be legal with our trucks. So we use our grain cart quite often then to know exactly how many pounds we're getting into the trucks. This little piece of equipment here too, what I would call the bag unloader, we paid roughly about $35,000 for this. So I guess in my bagging system, I've got about $70,000 worth of capital expenses into this machine. They're very simple, honestly, how they run and how they work. But this too, this tractor here is in neutral. And as it's actually pulling this, as it's winding up the bag, it's actually pulling the equipment further and further into the bag. And the grain actually comes up here, but then it spills back into the cross augers and outloads that way. Okay. Couple of the things that we've had really big trouble with in the past is we've had animals attack the bag, and the biggest problem would be deer, and maybe second one would be raccoons. But when I first started, we weren't expecting that. Now we have made ways of kind of dealing with that problem. We keep our old bags, and as you see here, the bag unloader is actually slitting the bag as we go. So as soon as we get our bags made in the fall, probably the next morning, our number one priority is to take our old bags and recover them. And then we put either little straw bales, or we even put wood pellets along the edges to keep that old bag on there. And then we also will take wood pellets on the nose of the grain bag. And that kind of acts like a cattle guard for deer. And they can't walk up on top of the bag anymore. And also when they come, they like to paw the sides of it. And so when you think about a tight bag and a piece of plastic and their little hooves, it's almost like little knives that will cut our bags. And so when we recover our bags with old plastic, that's kind of sitting there on there loosely. And so those, when they paw on the plastic comes or gives, and they don't get rewarded for scratching at the bag, and they go on and look for food elsewhere. The first time that we had this, I think I had probably roughly 50,000 bushels of wheat and in bags, and every bag that I had hoof prints on top where they'd cut the bag and they were splitting the bags on the sides. And I kind of went into panic mode and figured out some things, and we recovered those bags and saved our grain crop. But that's just one little trick that we've learned over the years that we kind of now we never seem to have any problem with it. We've had a little bit of issues with people walking on them. There again, once we've kind of double covered them, that's all went away. There is also another product that you can buy to recover your bags. That is, it's called Bag Armor, and it's a little green product that's over top of it. It's kind of a little mesh that actually works really well. I don't have a picture of it, but when the animals come on it, they actually rub their nose on it, and it hurts their nose, and they move on. The thing that I like about my old using my old bags is that those bags are just kind of they are nothing but garbage. I guess there are a few people that are recycling them, but I'm so far away from any of that it just becomes not economical to ship them anywhere. But I guess when we recover them, we have a lot of snow load in the winter. So when we're using the Bag Armor, lots of times that snow and that armor will freeze right here to the ground. And when trying to unload those bags in the winter, it's very, very difficult to get that Bag Armor out of the ice. So when we're having our old plastic on there, it is just garbage. So what we end up doing is then just taking the knife and splitting the top layer of plastic all the way to the back, and then we can lay it out, and and then we can get into the crop bag much easier that way. Okay. Couple of the things that we've had too, we've had kind of maybe set a bag in a low spot, and water will run into there. You kind of want to make sure that your field preparation or your spot is free of that. You kind of want drainage away from your bag. That's something you definitely need to be thinking about. As far as moisture going into the bag, I would say what you put in the bag is what's going to come out. You have absolutely no air in that bag. And you have a huge surface area. So a lot of your heating issues maybe there's not so much, but I still wouldn't put canola in a grain bag at more than 8%. Anything you start putting moisture into those bags, that grain actually burns up the oxygen, but then you start your fermentation process. So you would probably get a discoloring of the canola and also a different smell, which I don't think our processing companies would like whatsoever. That's about all I've got, I think. I would be open to any questions at this point.
Dale, how long do you typically leave canola in bags for?
Well, I always think my bags are a short-term storage solution. But having said that, I've had grain in grain bags for almost 12 months and no issues. I guess the way maybe to answer that is how well is your grain bag holding up? If you have a bunch of animals attack it, let's say you have a herd of elk come in there, you better get it up and get it out of there. But as long as your plastic is holding together, it's as good as the day you put it in. In fact, if you look at this little picture right here, here's this little green section here is our bag armor. And we're holding that on the ground here with these straw bales.
Okay. You typically try to put them as close to the road as you can, or do you keep them away from the road?
Well, I like to put them in a place where I can get my trucks. I don't want to put them out in the middle of nowhere, fighting mud and that kind of thing. I guess that's one advantage Bend has, is that you normally have a nice driveway, or you can get your trucks in and out of them at any time. But I guess maybe the issue with having them too close to the road is you might have human interaction with them. A guy with a pocket knife can make your world hurt in a hurry. But so far we haven't had any of that kind of issue.
Yeah. Brendan, got a question?
Yeah. Hey, Dale, so you were talking about filling your truck with your wagon. So do you have scales on your wagon to tell how much you're putting in your trucks? Is that what you're
Yes, we have
referring to?
Yeah, we have this grain cart has got scales on it, and yeah, once we've kind of got that dialed in, that grain cart's probably within 1% of actual weight. So the other thing we really, really like about having that scale on there is that harvest time, anymore, we will not combine grain without having the grain cart in the field. It gives us a very accurate weight from that field, and we can kind of pay landlords on that if we're commingling grain, or even if it's just kind of records for yield and data. That way it all prints out for me in the spring, and I can just kind of give that report to either my crop insurance people or landlords, or just for my own curiosity.
Is there anything on the bagging machine itself that records weight or bushels, or how do you know, I guess, how much you have in the bag? Just by what the grain cart says, or is there anything else?
Yeah, it's just by how much grain we're putting in there with the grain cart. Lots of times too, and I always buy 10 by 300 foot bags. Lots of times fields maybe don't fit into that bag, or we may have extra human that we can have one truck going to the elevator. So anyway, when we get the field done, we just we can stretch out a little extra plastic and then cut that off and seal that bag up, and we take our extra plastic to the next field.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys?
So in this picture, it looks like the ground underneath the bag. Is that just from the weight of the bag, or do you guys do something to the ground before you lay it down?
Well, lots of times what I'll do, kind of where we want the bag, is I will run over the stubble with the grain cart and tractor. Just try to knock all that stubble down so it's not sticking up and poking into the bag. Canola stalks are probably way worse for that than, say, a wheat or barley crop. I would think too, corn would be a terrible crop for poking holes into your bag at the base.
So all you do is just try to, like in canola, you just try to stomp down the stalks as much as you can before you lay the bag out.
Yes, that would be correct. Yep.
Do you have any waste?
Very, very little. As far as the bag, I have thrown very little away. Probably I've thrown more out of my grain bins than I do out of my bags. The other nice thing a little bit about the bags is, when you're in a grain bin and you're shoveling that last little bit out, you're breathing all that dust all day long. In this situation, we get there might be, say, 50 bushels of shoveling at the end of the bag. And normally what we'll do is we'll take a tractor and a loader up there and shovel that last 50 bushel into the loader tractor. And then we can go right into the truck with that bucket. The other issue here too a little bit is you kind of think about how this all works. When we're loading out of a bin, our auger is always stationary, and there's you're only kind of got one guy that needs to kind of watch that as the truck fills. In this situation, we've got a lot of moving pieces going on. This auger is actually moving into the bag, so it's a constant movement. So not only you got to worry about that backing into the bag straight, you also have to worry about where it's dumping in your truck. So, I mean, like the first time too, it was definitely a learning process that normally I like to either load the front and load the back and the truck, and we're out of there. This, you can never, you kind of got to anticipate where that auger is going to go. And you kind of have to keep thinking about how that's going to work. Lots of times when we're loading a truck out of a bag, we're actually having two people there, one to kind of just run the bagger and one to run the truck. In this situation with a grain cart, it really doesn't matter. One guy can run this at a very slow speed and keep up. But if you actually use the bag unloading system to its full potentials, easy, we could put 1,000 bushel on a truck in say 20 minutes. Well, one guy physically is not going to be able to do that. He's got to be in too many spots at once. So when we do it one man at a time, we just slow things way down and just let things go at a crawl and try to keep everything somewhat manageable.
Yeah. Thanks, Dale. Really appreciate that. That's very intriguing for us guys that have not bagged before, but I think it's a really great option in a lot of ways. So thank you.
You're welcome.
With that, we will move over to Stacy Lawrence with Columbia Grain.
Okay. First of all, thanks for having me here today, I guess. Hopefully I can bring some information to the table that people can find useful. My name's Stacy Lawrence. I manage the North Camas Prairie. The Camas Prairie, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is from a Columbia grain standpoint, is broken into two regions. We have a north and a south. And so speaking of the Camas Prairie as a whole, we probably on average will handle somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 bushels of canola on any given season. This year that'll go up, obviously, because of the price of canola. And again, if you break and look into the southern portion of the Camas Prairie, they grow a lot more non-GMO on that side, whereas the grasses, the GMO varieties, are utilized to take care of the grasses and weeds predominantly on my side. So it's a good rotation for us to control weeds. For the last few years, canola has just been planted on my side in the springtime, mainly for that. It wasn't a moneymaker, whereas this year I think there's some opportunity to make some money. Again, on my side of the prairie here on the northern end, there's quite a bit of home storage. I would say, I haven't really put math to it, but I would say if we're going to handle 250,000 bushel on my side, I would say there's another 30% of that is home stored and hauled directly to Warden. Warden is our outlet for the marketing people. So again, we'll sit on ours. We've shipped very little canola at this point, so we'll be shipping from March till June, maybe even into July before our bins are empty. I'm responsible for about 2.6 million bushel of total space between here and Nespers. Nespers has got the majority of the storage. So anyway, with that, we'll move on. Again, this is pretty, from a commercial standpoint, prior to the season, we'll put a plan together based on what's going to hit us. And obviously, we clean our bins thoroughly. From one year to the next, we may or may not be storing canola in the same bins from year to year. So we'll clean them thoroughly, install and inspect the aeration tubes. Brendan brought up earlier that a lot of the aeration systems are in our situation, we're not small enough to store the canola in, so we've had to change some of our aeration tubes to accommodate that. And again, we go through it before the season and make sure that we plug any holes. Canola is going to find the hole, and so we go through and make sure that we try to store our canola in bins that we've done that last year in, just because of that. You're going to find surprises if you go into new bins. And bugs are generally not a problem, so pre-spraying the bins before we put commodity in it, we do not do that. And from there, we just put a good plan in place. That being said, we have a facility in Nespers that allows us to segregate our GMO and non-GMO into different elevators. The experience on my end, we have, at one point we were trying to take it into both elevators, separate pits, but as it turns out, we've run into some issues that we don't sell all the seed. And so we're going off of what the farmers are telling us they're bringing us, but we monitor all loads. At least specifically when I say all loads, we will monitor the first load of every lot that is brought to us. We'll do a test to specifically determine if it's GMO or non-GMO. Those tests are fairly accurate. Depending on how Warden looks at it, their percentages and their testing facility is a lot more detailed on what they will accept. And we have run into it in the past that we've found seed that has not, it has been commingled sometime in the past before it made it to the elevator. And we've had some of our canola that got into 2% GMO mixed in with non-GMO. And that was caught at the elevator. So I would ask any of the farmers to be patient, because there's a lot riding on those tests from our end of it. We do our best. It takes a little bit of time to do those tests, but in the end, it pays dividends to catch that on the front side. And like I said, we test frequently. So we store it in separate elevators, and we never receive GMO through the same pit as non-GMO. Never do we do that. Occasionally we'll have truck drivers that are hauling GMO in the morning and non-GMO in the afternoon. They have to do a thorough clean down before we will allow them to switch back and forth. And if you're a farmer, we've had some of those guys that'll harvest GMO and go directly into a non-GMO field back and forth, and think that little bit that's in the bottom of the grain tank doesn't affect anything. It does. And obviously you can go from non-GMO to GMO and not have any big effect. But if you're going from GMO the other direction, you can really set yourself up for failure if you don't monitor that. I would just say pay attention to the detail. Moving over to the storage on the commercial end of things, our fall, winter canola, whatever you want to say, it has a higher oil content. We've We found that out as well as with our mustard when we sent it to the processing facilities. It's upwards of 40%, which on the scheme of things, I would ask you, Dale, what is your oil content? Do you have any idea over there? You're on mute.
Most of our oil contents is in that, say, 43 to 48%.
Okay. Anyway, the higher the oil content, the more susceptible it is to heating and storage issues. And so we have just set a threshold at the pit level, and we take the moisture samples here in the office, that 8% max, no exceptions. The farmers generally in our area have come to accept that, and the guys at the pit will monitor it. If they get into green looking material, we'll actually shut a truck off and take a moisture sample. That being said, are we getting some in the elevator with higher than 8%? Yes, we've run some upwards of 10% through. And if it's a big load, we'll actually ship it out. We will have, obviously we have probably some access to facilities that farmers don't, but we will actually haul a load out if we run into something that we're uncomfortable with. It's nothing to play around with. And so we'll run it from one bin to the next to try and blend it down and take samples regularly if we know that we took some wet stuff in. But there again, by and large, our farmers have come to accept the fact that we won't take it at 8%. Will they get into wet spots that we can see that they've got into a draw or something like that? Yes. But again, the farmers have respected that, and they'll go back later and cut those spots later. I would tell everybody to be patient. That stuff that dries naturally, it's better for all the parties involved if you can just be patient. I understand that weather plays a role in it, but at the end of the day, if you can cut it at 8%, by the time you're generally done, it's going to be less than that if the weather's cooperating. If you have higher moisture content, is like I said, if it's encountered, we blend it with other bins. It's just we don't take it lightly, I guess is probably the best way of putting it. And have we run into problems? Yeah, they're few and far between, but if we are disciplined and make everybody follow the rules, we've done a pretty decent job of not having any problems. Humidity creates a problem. Those of you who experienced the rain season that we had 2 years ago, and we had garbs in the field and stuff like that, just to give you, for example, we had days in there that the garbs were not drying down. That was due to the higher humidity and the temperature. And as long as that's going, we all have to work together, and we've been fortunate enough to work in an area that has, generally speaking, low humidity. Or if we don't, within a couple of days, the low humidity comes back. So we can usually wait out the storm, per se. You know, our fall canola comes off. Oh, weather permitting, it'll start the latter part of July and first part of August, whereas the spring canola, it's usually getting harvested at the same time as what our spring wheat is, latter part of August into September, and we can get into rains in that timeline into September end of things. And again, obviously the GMO, we haven't run into specifically green because of the Roundup Ready stuff, but the foreign material that's in the canola, if it's coming in the combine green and the canola is dry, the green canola or the green weeds can create just as bad of a problem with canola as what wet canola can. So obviously you're going to get docked for the dockage, but there's a double whammy there with the green material affecting your canola storage. And the other thing is, as soon as we got enough canola in the bins that have aeration on them, we start the aeration, and we won't shut it off. Our aeration fans, we will run those. We'll run those from the start of harvest until October, November timeline. I mean, basically all you're doing is using electricity, but boy, it sure does pay dividends in the end. Spring canola, again, it's not as high oil content, and so therefore it's not as susceptible to heating. Plus, we have the luxury, usually in the spring canola, it's had a better timeline in drying and things like that. So again, same rules apply for the spring canola as fall canola. It's 8% max, no exceptions. If it comes in at 8.5%, maybe if it's early in the morning, we'll let them bring it at 8.5%. But for the most part, it's 8 or less, and usually nobody's balking at arguing with the standpoint either. If we get a rain on canola that's been dry enough, the canola will dry faster in the field than the wheat will, and so again, it dries better on the stalk than trying to bring us wet canola from rain. So I would recommend with rain, even though there's rain clouds in the sky, it'll dry out quick. After harvest, we do check our bins regularly. We do have some bigger bins in nespers that don't have air on them, and we'll core those a couple of times through the winter time to just make sure that we don't have hot spots in it. An alternate method, if we have the ability that we've got more than one bin, we can bring it from one bin to the next. But again, we are monitoring that, and we're moving them quite often. So, and with that, if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Thanks, Stacy. So in terms of moving it, you mentioned, how often are you moving canola around just to, move it from bin to bin? And
once it's stored, or are you talking about if we get some green wet stuff in harvest?
Yeah, once it's stored. So I guess are you not moving it if you know it's nice and dry and you've got air? Are you not going to move it around?
If we have air, which we have on some bigger tanks in nespers, we'll pull initially when the season's done and we've had the fans, say about the 1st of November, to where we can turn the fans off. We won't check it any longer. We're pretty satisfied with what's going on there. But right after harvest, specifically, we store some in the concrete elevator that doesn't have air in it, and we have the ability to take it out of one bin into another because we'll have more than one bin. We'll run several thousand bushel, probably 5 to 10, 15,000 bushel through to make sure that we don't have any hot spots in the core of that. And we'll do that. If we're done harvesting in September, we'll probably do that in mid-October and again in January sometime to just avoid any surprises. But again, those don't have air. The stuff here in Craigmont, we have air, and the things in there's a GMO bin over in Nespers. It's a bigger one we have air on. So,
do you notice how much moisture do you lose from aeration? Is it much at all, or point or less, or what do you think?
I don't think we lose a whole heck of a lot. If we get into the dry end of things you're probably referring back to shrinkage or something like that you're going to lose some weight.
Yeah.
We'll get into the latter part of harvest and you'll do a moisture sample on some canola and it'll be down into the 4% range. That stuff that's excessively dry, it'll only get so dry. So if you're running the fans in it, our humidity is only going to bring it down. What do they call it? An equilibrium moisture content or something like that. Yeah, it'll only get so dry based on the humidity. And I would say all things, you may lose 1% if you brought in some 8% moisture canola, but it isn't going to get much drier than that. Just because of the humidity in the air.
Hey, Stacy, you mentioned testing for the non-GMO and GMO when trucks were coming in. How do you guys do that?
Basically, if you remember your chemistry test in class, I knew somebody had asked that. We buy their test strips, their litmus test strips, and we grind it. I just have a little bitty coffee grinder and we'll take a sample off the truck. and grind it up, and you put a teaspoon of the ground up canola in some water, and you dump the test strip. You just put the test strip in, and it changes colors on you. It's looking for the GMO trait. Each test strip is, if memory serves me correctly, it's about $2 a test strip. We buy them, they just come in a little bottle, and they're like 100 test strips in a bottle. From our end of it, obviously, we're probably in a different category than farmers, because we have, I mean, there's a lot of risk on our end of it if we don't know. And we're going off of people's words. If we don't sell the seed, we're not aware of what they put in the ground. And it's like I said, a few years ago, I know there was bad seed, or whether it was somebody had a bag of seed left over and put it in their drill thinking it was one thing and another, but we ended up getting some that was partially contaminated. So, you know, if you guys could be dealing with some of that stuff, and it would behoove you to know that before you messed up an entire bin.
Any other questions? I see we had a few in the Q&A section there. You guys can look back through. One I wanted to address that I saw a couple times was positive versus negative flow aeration. And I actually texted Stacy. He couldn't join us, but he said in our area, they prefer positive flow. So pushing air into the bin, because they've had scenarios where the vents on the top will get plugged up with frost or snow, and they've actually sucked bin roofs down into the bin with a negative flow fan, pulling air through the top. So I think there's pluses and minuses of both systems, but just be aware that if you have a negative flow fan system, the vents on the top, keeping those clear.